In this fictional account, it starts with a file no one is supposed to see delivered quietly, stamped urgently, and carried through palace corridors like a live grenade. The headline inside is devastating. Sophie's business partners have allegedly exposed fraud, and money is the motive. But the real shock isn't the accusation, it's the fallout, because when a scandal touches royal blood, the palace doesn't ask what's true. It asks what must be sacrificed. And Edward, in this story, becomes the sacrifice. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The first sign something has snapped isn't a speech or a headline. It's a hot leak atmosphere that hits the household like cold air. A sealed envelope moves hand to hand. Names are whispered like they're dangerous objects. And then the staff behavior changes suddenly. Everyone is careful. Not careful in a polite way, careful in a survival way. Because palace crises aren't handled like family problems. They're handled like security threats. Contain the risk, control the flow, limit who knows what, and above all, prevent the story from developing a life of its own. That's why the file matters more than the allegation inside it. In this dramatized world, the palace doesn't treat fraud as a moral issue first. It treats it as a destabilizer. Something that can spread, stain, and attach itself to every other name in the family tree. The rumor isn't just that Sophie's business partners exposed wrongdoing for money. The rumor is that they did it with intent profit, punishment, self-protection, maybe all three. And when money is the motive, truth becomes flexible, selective, weaponized. The palace knows that. Which is why the first instinct isn't to defend Sophie or Edward. The first instinct is to control what the public is allowed to believe before the public decides it for them. And that is where Edward's vulnerability becomes tragic. He is a minor royal in the brutal arithmetic of monarchy, important enough to be associated, not important enough to be protected at all costs. In the palace hierarchy, some people are pillars, others are buffers. Buffers exist to absorb damage so the pillars don't crack. In this story, Edward's position makes him the easiest kind of casualty, visible enough that sacrificing him sends a message, yet distant enough that the institution believes it can survive the loss of his standing without destabilizing the core. So the central allegation lands like a trap. Business partners expose fraud to cash out, to punish, or to escape blame. That's the possibility that makes everyone's hands shake behind their controlled smiles. Because if the partners are motivated by money, they don't just want justice. They want leverage. They want a payoff, a settlement, a buyout, a reputation rescue, or revenge disguised as righteousness. And leverage is dangerous in royal life because it creates a second power center outside the palace people the monarchy can't order, can't reassign, can't silence with protocol. The palace response, in this fictional account, is immediate and cold. Containment first, compassion later if ever. Meetings that were supposed to happen are delayed. Calls are screened. Friends who once had easy access suddenly can't get through. The household tightens around the narrative the way a body tightens around a wound. Not to heal it, but to stop it from bleeding in public. And Edward, watching the system shift around him, begins to understand the most brutal lesson of all. The palace does not protect people. It protects stability. People are protected only when they serve stability. The timing becomes the mystery that fuels everything. Why now? Why expose it now? In this dramatized world, timing is never accidental. If partners suddenly speak, it's because they have something to gain or something to lose. A deadline. A failed negotiation. A rival's move. A deal offered and refused. The palace begins asking the same question in a different language. Who benefits most from detonating this at this moment? Because the answer determines the counterattack. If it's a cash grab, the palace can isolate and outlast it. If it's revenge, the palace can discredit. But if its self-protection partner's flipping before they can be blamed, then the palace is dealing with something worse than accusation. It's dealing with a chain reaction. And then comes the cliffhanger that turns scandal into existential danger. Whispers claim the file includes something worse than numbers, names, and signatures. Not just allegations, but links. Not just suspicious behavior, but a map of who approved what, who knew what, and when. Because once names enter the paper trail, the palace can't pretend this is someone else's problem. Names make it contagious. Signatures make it undeniable. And if Edward's name is even near that list, whether fairly or unfairly, the palace will do what it always does when a royal becomes a risk. It will shrink him before the story can grow. But to understand why this would ruin Edward so fast, we have to step into the monarchy's harshest truth. A royal's value is measured in stability, not loyalty. In this dramatized world, the palace doesn't ask, "Is he innocent?" It asks, "Can we survive him?" Because royals aren't just family, they're symbols. And symbols have expiration dates when scandal threatens the brand. This section reveals the palace's internal logic. Crisis becomes math, emotions become liabilities, and Edward's position suddenly looks disposable. Not because he's guilty, because he's convenient. And convenience is deadly in a monarchy. Institutional survival is the palace's primary instinct in this fictional account, and it operates like a reflex. The moment scandal touches royal blood, the palace stops speaking in human language and starts speaking in risk language. Who is protected? Who is exposed? Who can be defended without damaging the crown? There's a hierarchy of protection, and it's colder than the public wants to believe. Some royals are shielded because they are pillars, and others are used as buffers because they are replaceable. Buffers absorb the impact, so the symbol at the center stays intact. Edward, in this dramatized logic, becomes a perfect buffer, close enough to be blamed by association, distant enough to be sacrificed without collapsing the institution. That's where brand contamination becomes the fear. One scandal doesn't just hurt one name, it can taint multiple generations in the public imagination. It can infect patronages, charities, partnerships, even the emotional trust the public places in the monarchy's duty narrative. And the palace fears donors and patronages because they're not just money, they're legitimacy. They're proof that people still want to be associated with the crown. Public trust is the monarchy's currency, and scandal burns currency fast. So the palace begins thinking like an insurer: reduce exposure, minimize spread, isolate the risk, rewrite the association. In this dramatized scenario, the strategy begins to form with brutal clarity. Separate Edward from Sophie publicly to reduce shared fallout. Not because the marriage is weak, but because public separation creates the illusion of containment. It tells the world the problem is being handled. It also tells insiders something else: loyalty is optional when stability is threatened. Edward's life becomes a calculation made by people who don't love him, people whose job is not to protect his heart, but to protect the institution's face. And that is the emotional horror beneath the protocol: real people being treated like variables. Then the whisper lands that changes everything. Insiders hint the palace had a contingency plan ready before the exposure. A plan doesn't appear overnight. A plan suggests anticipation. Suspicion, quiet preparation for a scenario the palace believed was possible long before the public did. And if that's true, then Edward isn't just reacting to a scandal, he's walking into a trap that was already built to catch someone. And if a contingency plan existed, then the exposure wasn't just a surprise, it was the trigger for a protocol built to erase a royal quietly. In this fictional telling, the most dangerous royals aren't the ones with titles, they're the ones with documents. Sophie's business partners allegedly didn't expose fraud out of morality. They exposed it for money. And when money drives a revelation, the truth gets twisted into a weapon. This section unpacks the partners' motives: revenge, payoff, protection, or power. Because when insiders speak, it's rarely because they suddenly found a conscience, it's because they found leverage. The partners in this dramatized world fall into archetypes you can almost recognize without names. The resentful ex-ally who feels cheated. The opportunist who sees headlines as currency. The panicked cover-up artist who flips first to avoid being blamed last. Profit motive shapes everything. Selling information. Securing settlements. Forcing buyouts. Redirecting blame so the spotlight lands on someone else before it lands on them. That's why timing matters more than the allegation. Why leak now? What changed in the last week? A deal that failed. A payment that didn't arrive. A rival who moved first. A threat that made someone panic. The palace reads timing like a heartbeat because timing reveals motive, and manipulation becomes part of the danger. Selective evidence can create a narrative that feels inevitable, even if it's incomplete. A few numbers without context. A message without the thread. A signature without the conversation that led to it. In scandal, fragments don't just inform, they persuade. And once the partners go public, they can't be controlled like palace staff. The palace can't reassign them, can't silence them with protocol, can't flatter them into obedience. Public partners are free agents, and free agents are chaos to an institution built on choreography. So the partners may be protecting themselves by blaming Sophie or Edward, first turning proximity into guilt. That's the cold genius of survival. Push the heat toward the royal name, because the royal name will absorb attention. And if a royal falls, the partners can claim they were telling the truth all along, even if their truth is carefully shaped to save themselves. Then comes the cliffhanger that shifts the power balance. One partner allegedly recorded a conversation. In a palace, recordings are nightmares. Not because they're always illegal or dramatic, but because they remove deniability. They turn whispers into artifacts. And artifacts don't disappear just because the palace wants them to. A recording turns the scandal from rumor into leverage, something that can be sold, traded, threatened, or released at the worst possible moment. But partners can only expose what they can prove. And what they can prove allegedly drags Edward into the blast radius. In this dramatized arc, Edward wakes up as a royal and falls asleep as a problem. Because the palace doesn't separate guilt from association, it separates risk from safety. This section traces Edward's alleged freefall, calls not returned, meetings cancelled, aides reassigned, patronages reviewed. The loss isn't loud, it's surgical. And the scariest part is how quickly he realizes the crown won't defend him until it's sure defending him won't hurt it. It begins with a silence that feels like a door closing without sound. The silent demotion doesn't come with confrontation. It comes with absence. Fewer appearances, fewer briefings, fewer invitations, each reduction small enough to be denied, devastating enough to be felt. In this fictional account, Edward watches his calendar thin out as if the palace is editing him in real time. A meeting is postponed. A visit is unnecessary. A public engagement is under review. And the phrase "under review" becomes a shadow that follows him, because it implies the palace is deciding whether he still deserves to exist in the public picture. Then the social freezing starts. Allies vanish to avoid becoming collateral. People who once offered warmth suddenly become polite ghosts, not because they stopped caring, but because they fear guilt by proximity. In a monarchy, sympathy is dangerous when the institution is hunting stability. Edward feels it in the smallest shifts. Conversations that end too soon, eyes that look away too quickly, doors opened by staff who suddenly won't meet his gaze. Shame creeps in, then disbelief, then the terror of being abandoned by the very system he served. The worst part isn't the loss of events. It's the loss of certainty, realizing his status is conditional and can be revoked emotionally before it's revoked officially. And internal suspicion makes it worse. In this dramatized timeline, Edward is treated like he knows more than he admits, even when he swears he doesn't. Every question becomes an interrogation disguised as concern. Every "how are you holding up" feels like "what are you hiding?" Because once a scandal hits, innocence is not assumed. Innocence is negotiated. The palace starts reading his body language as evidence, his silence as strategy, his presence as contamination. That's what the institution does when it's afraid. It turns people into risk profiles. Then comes the forced narrative, creeping in like fog, the voluntary step back, presented as choice, not punishment. A graceful exit wrapped in dignity language. It's the palace's favorite trick: make the target announce their own reduction, so the institution can claim it was consensual. Edward is offered an escape hatch that's actually a trap. Step back quietly, and the palace will manage the fallout. Resist, and the palace will manage him. Public mask versus private panic becomes his daily reality. Smiles outside, collapse inside, because royal life demands performance even when the floor is disappearing. The cliffhanger arrives in the form of a message that doesn't need to be explicit to be brutal. It implies he must choose between Sophie and the crown. Not shouted, not threatened openly, just conveyed with that cold palace clarity that says, there is only one safe answer. And Edward understands instantly that the palace isn't looking for truth. It's looking for a clean story. A story where responsibility is assigned and the institution walks away intact. And when a royal is forced to choose, the palace is already preparing the statement, because the next move is always public choreography. A scandal doesn't destroy the monarchy. Unmanaged scandal does. In this fictional account, the palace responds like a machine: control the timeline, control the words, control the faces the public is allowed to see. This section reveals the alleged containment playbook: strategic leaks, rehearsed denials, quiet distancing, and the most ruthless tool of all, turning a person into an administrative issue. Because once the palace uses bureaucratic language, it can commit emotional violence without leaving fingerprints. The crisis playbook unfolds with mechanical calm, briefings, then framing, then controlled optics, then targeted silence. First, the right people are told the right version of events. Then a narrative frame is chosen: something tidy, something soothing, something that sounds responsible. Then optics shift. Edward's visibility is reduced before the worst headlines can land, so the public sees less of him and feels less attached when the palace tightens its grip. And after optics come words: approved talking points designed to flatten complexity into a sentence the public can digest. A private matter. Under review. Appropriate steps. Language that sounds harmless until you realize it's the language of erasure. Scapegoating mechanics hum beneath it all. Sacrifice the least protected to protect the symbol. If the palace can funnel outrage toward Edward, the central institution remains insulated. But the stakes are dangerous, because cover stories can become more damaging than the truth if they collapse. A clean narrative is only useful if it holds. If it cracks, it proves the palace tried to manage perception instead of addressing reality, and that transforms a scandal into a legitimacy crisis. Inside the gates, punishment spreads quietly. Staff and allies are disciplined for loyalty errors, for being seen with the wrong person at the wrong time, for speaking too freely or offering comfort too publicly. The palace doesn't just manage the scandal, it manages the ecosystem around it, pruning relationships, tightening access, enforcing silence until everyone forgets what normal felt like. Then the final cliffhanger hits. Rumors suggest two versions of the plan's soft retreat, or total scorched earth. One path offers Edward a quiet disappearance with dignity language. The other path wipes him out publicly if he resists. And once he knows those are the options, the true nature of the palace machine becomes unmistakable. It isn't asking him to survive. It's asking him to comply. But the palace can't control one thing: what Sophie does when her world collapses, and that's where the story turns personal. In this dramatized thriller, Sophie becomes the center of a storm she can't outrun. If the partners exposed fraud for money, then Sophie is trapped between two nightmares: admit wrongdoing and destroy the family's future, or deny it and watch Edward take the fall. This section explores her alleged private dilemma: fear turning into calculation, love turning into strategy, because in a palace, even marriage becomes a negotiation when survival is on the line. Sophie's emotional landscape in this fictional account is not a single feeling, it's a collision. Panic first, because panic is what happens when you realize the palace has stopped protecting you and started measuring you. Anger next, because being exposed for money doesn't feel like justice, it feels like being hunted by people who want to profit from your ruin. Pride follows, sharp and stubborn, because pride is often the last defense against humiliation. And underneath it all, the urge to control the narrative, because Sophie understands something Edward is only beginning to learn. The palace doesn't punish facts. It punishes stories. Competing pressures close in from every direction. Lawyers want a strategy that wins in court. Palace advisors want a strategy that wins in public. Family expectations want a strategy that wins in silence. And Sophie is caught at the center of those contradictions, because each winning outcome requires a different kind of sacrifice. The marriage strain becomes unbearable. Edward's loyalty, in this dramatized timeline, looks like a rope he's willing to hold until his hands bleed. Sophie's self-preservation looks like a knife she's forced to pick up before someone else uses it against her. Love doesn't disappear, but it becomes complicated by fear, and fear turns conversation into negotiation. That's where the truth spectrum matters. In scandals, everything is flattened into guilt or innocence. But Sophie's alleged dilemma lives in the grey. Not all wrongdoing is equal. Not all accusations are clean. And in this fictional account, she suspects exaggeration partners selecting evidence, shaping timelines, leaving out context to make the story look inevitable. She begins asking the only question that matters when money is driving the exposure: what is true, what is twisted, and who benefits from the twist? Because if the partners are protecting themselves, they may be pushing blame upward, toward the royal name that can absorb public rage. Leverage becomes Sophie's oxygen. She may hold evidence that shifts blame back to the partner's emails, contracts, approvals, conversations, the kind of details that make the story less simple and therefore harder to weaponize. But leverage is dangerous too, because using it requires escalation, and escalation invites the palace to treat her as the problem rather than the victim. The tragedy is that her love story has already become a liability in public perception. Even if Edward is innocent, he looks guilty by proximity. Even if Sophie is targeted, she looks complicit by association. The institution loves clean narratives, and this one is messy enough that the palace can't easily protect them without risking contamination. Then comes the cliffhanger that makes the story feel less like a scandal and more like a transaction. Sophie receives an offer: money for silence, or silence for protection. Two different doors leading to the same trap. Money for silence means she becomes part of the cover-up narrative. Silence for protection means she becomes dependent on the palace's mercy. Either way, the choice isn't moral, it's survival. And that's the most devastating part: her fate is being negotiated like a contract, while the world assumes it's simply about right and wrong. And once money enters the negotiation, the scandal stops being about morality, it becomes about who can afford to control the ending. The moment this story leaks, it stops being a private business dispute and becomes a royal trial. In this fictional account, anonymous sources surface, narratives harden, and the palace's silence becomes gasoline. The public splits: some see Edward as collateral damage, others see him as complicit by proximity. And once the crowd is choosing sides, the palace loses its favorite weapon: ambiguity. Because the world demands a villain, and the palace starts deciding who it can afford to offer. Coordinated leaks hit first, because framing is always phase one. Strategic clarifications appear almost instantly, timed narrative drops designed to shape emotion before facts can stabilize. Some leaks paint Edward as a victim: gentle, loyal, unfortunate. Others paint him as an accomplice too close to not know, too protected to be innocent. The media machine turns the story into an outrage engine, feeding engagement with conflict, recycling the same questions with sharper language each day. And the palace's silence reads like proof. Every non-denial becomes confirmation in public eyes, because people assume an institution that could deny would deny. When it doesn't, the imagination fills the gap with suspicion. Inside the gates, internal pressure spikes. Courtiers align early with whoever they think survives, because palace loyalty is often future loyalty. Staff tighten access. Advisors argue over which narrative is safest. Behind the scenes, panic grows, because containment without admitting knowledge is a high-wire act. If the palace speaks, it risks admitting it knew. If it stays silent, it risks looking guilty. So it tries to manage the consequences, instead reducing visibility, reshuffling roles, protecting higher status symbols by pushing damage toward the most expendable figure. Then the cliffhanger lands with a hard name. A final witness appears, someone rumored to hold the deciding proof. Not gossip, not implication. Proof documents, recordings, signatures. A detail that could collapse one version of the story and force the palace into another. And once a final witness exists, everyone in the palace starts calculating the same terrifying thing: how to control what happens when truth becomes undeniable. And once proof enters the arena, the palace's only move is to control consequences, because consequences are what protect the crown. In this fictional finale, the real punishment isn't a court case, it's erasure. Edward doesn't just lose public favor, he loses access, identity, future, and the illusion that royal life is secure. We connect every thread: the partner's money motive, the alleged exposure, Sophie's dilemma, the palace machine, and the public trial. And we ask the darkest question of all. When the crown protects itself by shrinking one of its own, does it survive, or does it prove it will sacrifice anyone when fear demands it? Because the win conditions in this dramatized world are painfully clear. Whose image improves when the dust settles? The institutions, if it can present itself as decisive, responsible, above the mess. Whose power consolidates? The gatekeepers who argued for containment, the strategists who framed the narrative first, the courtiers who aligned early with the version of events most likely to survive. And who loses? The person who became convenient, the person who could be reduced without threatening the throne's center of gravity. Edward, in this story, isn't destroyed by law alone. He's destroyed by positioning. The tragedy is intimate. Marriage and family bonds are crushed by institutional self-preservation, not necessarily by hatred, but by fear. Sophie's dilemma becomes a permanent scar. If she speaks, she risks detonating what's left of their future. If she stays silent, she becomes complicit in the story that ruins them. Edward's loyalty becomes a weakness the palace can weaponize. Love, something the public assumes is sacred, becomes a liability to be managed. And once a royal life is treated as an administrative issue, the human consequences stop being considered relevant. That's where precedent becomes the most chilling theme. If a royal can be reduced, anyone can be reduced. Titles, patronages, visibility, access, none of it is permanent when stability is threatened. In this fictional account, the crown's motive isn't truth through healing, it's survival through sacrifice. The palace doesn't aim to understand the full complexity, it aims to stop the bleeding. And stopping the bleeding often means shrinking one person until the public forgets they mattered. Lost everything doesn't just mean a career setback, it means social death. It means the quiet destruction of identity, no longer invited, no longer briefed, no longer treated as inside. The most brutal punishment in monarchy is not prison, it's being made irrelevant while still alive, watching your world continue without you, as if you were never essential. That is the punishment Edward faces in this dramatized finale, not one dramatic fall, but a controlled disappearance. And the final cliffhanger question hangs in the air like a warning the palace refuses to answer. Who is the next royal the institution will quietly erase in the next crisis? Because once an institution learns that sacrifice works, it reaches for sacrifice again. The call to action is simple and unsettling question: how power uses scandal to reassign blame, protect myths, and keep the symbol clean at any human cost, because the real shock isn't that the partners exposed something for money, it's what the palace's response reveals about how quickly royalty becomes disposable. Just when the palace believes the story is contained, a final detail surfaces in this fictional account. A single phone call, short, controlled, and terrifying, suggesting the exposure was engineered, not accidental. If true, it reframes everything. Edward wasn't ruined by scandal alone, he was ruined by strategy. And the most chilling part? The call implies the palace didn't just react, it anticipated. The twist is quiet but explosive. The exposure may have been allowed to happen. Not because anyone wanted scandal, but because someone wanted outcome. A larger internal rivalry suddenly makes sense. Someone needed Edward weakened. Someone needed a distraction. Someone needed a clean break in the hierarchy that couldn't be achieved politely. And the partners weren't the only ones chasing money. Others were chasing influence, access, relevance, control of the next chapter. That's the idea of a controlled collapse. Sacrifice one to stabilize the rest. If the palace can direct the fall, it can protect what matters most. If it can predict the headlines, it can pre-write the response. And if it can pre-write the response, it can survive anything except the truth that it survives by consuming its own. Future fallout is inevitable, because a story this big doesn't end. It gets repositioned. The phone call doesn't clear anyone, it condemns the system. And the cliffhanger lands with one final line, allegedly spoken without a name attached. It's done. No signature, no trace, just completion. And if it's done really was said, then the next chapter isn't about Edward at all. It's about who the crown decides to protect next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.